Hello, this is Yuhan Zhu. Welcome to GHAA's second video. For today's interview, we've invited Mr. Jon Lomberg, who is the design director of the Golden Record. And we are going to mainly discuss about his own perspective on astronomy as an artist and some of the major projects he's been working on, including the Golden Record, and then his more personal project, the Galaxy Garden. Hope you enjoyed the video. So hi, Mr. Lomberg. It is such an honor to have you here. My name is Hank, and next to me is Ozobek and Jack.
Hello to all of you. I'm happy to be here.
Hi. So, so the first question is, how your interest in astronomy began? Like, can you briefly, uh, tell the behind story about it?
I think I was interested in astronomy from the time I was born. I don't remember a time that I wasn't interested in astronomy. The very first books I remember reading were books about space. And for me, it was hard to understand everybody.
Oh, oh, yeah. And like, you moved to Hawaii from Shanghai, right?
Oh, wait,
And
wait.
then,
Oh,
why? What was the reason for this? Like, was it for like stargazing? Like, is it uh good in for is Hawaii is good for stargazing?
Hawaii is famous as being one of the best places in the world for stargazing. And on the summit of Mauna Kea, the highest mountain, there are at the peak there were 13 observatories down up there. Not so many now, but still it's one of the best places to do astronomy. And that was one of the reasons that I moved to Hawaii from Toronto in Canada, where I was living. And part of the reason was the astronomy. Part of the reason is that Hawaii is a very, very beautiful place. It's a beautiful island. It's tropical. We have coral reefs. We have beautiful rainforests. And there's actually quite a lot of science that's done here in Hawaii too, because we have the volcanoes here and a lot of research on whales and not to mention astronomy.
oh, so Jack and I
Yeah. So
currently, live in Shanghai, and then, for me, stargazing is a sort of, exciting experience because you never know when the star is going to come out. So last week, like it was such a coincidence that I was outside. I was with a telescope, and I moved the telescope to up to the rooftop, and I actually saw Capella and Arcturus, and I've never had actually used my own telescope to observe these two stars, and then it was definitely an amazing experience. And for you, who live in Hawaii, when the sky is sort of always that clear and the stargazing experience is always wonderful, what does stargazing actually mean to you?
Well, before I moved to Hawaii, I lived all my life in cities. And even though I was always interested in astronomy, I didn't really see the stars very often. Uh, like Shanghai, all the cities that I lived in were either cloudy or there was so much light from the city that you could hardly ever see the stars, and then only the brightest stars. So it was always very special to me to go outside the city. And since I lived in Hawaii, I really learned the stars because when you see them every night, it makes it much easier to learn them. I learned all the constellations, and I did a lot of public stargazing for the general public and also at some of the hotels here. I would do stargazing programs to share the wonderful skies with everybody else.
yeah, 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 yeah. That's cool. That's cool. And like, And one of your greatest projects, um, I guess, like Golden Record, like which part of the design you were involved in this project? Then were there any challenges you faced, difficulties? Like, can you like explain more us about this process?
The Golden Record, there are two of
Yeah.
them, each of the two Voyager spacecraft, and their purpose is in the distant future, since the spacecraft leave the solar system and travel between the stars, maybe someday somebody finds one of the spacecraft. We
Mm,
don't know if there are other people or other beings out there in spacecraft, but if they are, maybe they will find one of the Voyagers 1 million or 10 million or 100 million years from now. And the purpose of the record
mm,
to tell something about the species that made the spacecraft. The spacecraft itself tells a lot about our technology, but it doesn't tell about our culture. So the purpose of the Golden Record was to tell whoever finds the spacecraft who made the spacecraft and what we were like. The project was thought of and headed by two astronomers. Carl Sagan's their idea. And they put together a small team of people to make the record. And I was one of the people they asked to work on this. The reason I was asked was that I am an artist and was always very interested in the idea of communicating with with extraterrestrials. And most of the
yeah.
scientists who talked about this thought, what could we have in common with extraterrestrials? How could we talk to them? And the answer is we have in common the same universe and the same stars and the same elements and the same laws of physics. So that will be what allows us to understand each other. Perhaps also mathematics. We can understand prime numbers. We can understand
Mm,
principles in mathematics. And this will be how we establish communication. My idea was that many things in art, in music, and in architecture, and in painting are also based on the laws of physics. The reason certain notes harmonize with each other has to do with the physics of sound. And there are certain things in nature, seashells and galaxies, and many other things that we find beautiful. And I think extraterrestrials will find them beautiful too. And I think if they have art, their art may be similar to our art. So maybe art is how we can communicate with extraterrestrials. So when Carl Sagan and Frank Drake had the idea of sending a record where they could send music and pictures, they asked me to participate as an artist. And I helped pick the music and I helped design a series of, well, let me say a word about the music. The music is from all countries, many countries, including China. In fact, the oldest piece on the record is a Chinese piece over 2,000 years old, uh, played on the chin. And there's music from India, there's
mhm.
music from Africa, there's music from Europe, there's music from South America. We try to represent the whole world because our idea in this message was this is not a message from NASA. This is not a message from the United States. This is a message from the whole world. So we tried to represent the whole world in the music and in the greetings that people were saying hello in the 64 most common languages spoken on Earth, again, including 2 Chinese languages. And finally, the main thing that I worked on was a series of over 100 pictures, photographs and drawings that tried to explain what the Earth was like. So this was the task. This was the challenge. The other thing that made it very difficult was that we only had 6 weeks to design and create our message.
That is absolutely remarkable to do that, to do such a great project in 6 weeks. And when you were talking, you also mentioned that there are some aesthetics values that the aliens might also appreciate as humans do. Then do you think? And then I read one of your papers explaining how mathematics and aesthetics are related, and you mentioned the phi, and do you think the
Yes,
universe is fundamentally mathematical?
that's a very deep question. I think it's more correct to say mathematics describes the universe very well. Does it exist apart from the universe? I don't know. Will alien mathematics be like our own? Do 1 and 1 equal 2 everywhere? It seems to us the answer is yes. But one of the most interesting things in meeting aliens will be to learn what do we have that are similar and what do we have that are different.
Then, as an artist, I've noticed that you also enjoys combining mathematical elements with your own creation. Then, would you actually consider math as a kind of art?
Absolutely. I think math is a kind of art. I think it requires creativity. I think it requires insight. I think it requires very much the same kind of ability to play with ideas that artists have. The technique is very different, and maybe the kind of brain is different, but I think there's the fact that somebody new can come along and find something brand new in mathematics that nobody ever saw before. I think that's a wonderful thing. I think it's amazing that a smart person can think of something that nobody else has thought of in all of history, and it becomes a part of history. And I think that that ability to do mathematics is very fundamental to everything else we do, all our technology, all our science, all our ability to create the world we have created. So it's very hard to imagine that aliens could have created a technology and spaceships without mathematics.
Then, at the same time, do you think there are any clashes between artistic expression and mathematics? Because mathematics in most people's mind is so rational, while artist is about, the sensitivity and creation, imagination.
Well, it's much more objective to prove something in mathematics. If you prove a theorem in mathematics, you can say with a great deal of confidence, this is true. Whether something in art is true depends very much on our subjective feelings. Art that for some people is very true, for other people is very random. Some people with abstract art, for example, they can see a lot in it. And for other people, it's just random paint. So there are some very interesting differences between mathematics and art. And I think the biggest one is that and it's also, we can talk about science and art. And I think the same thing holds true, that science and art are very similar and require similar kinds of creativity. But in science, you can have a beautiful theory that turns out to be wrong. But a beautiful painting remains a beautiful painting.
Yeah,
I think you can prove it's wrong.
Yes, yeah, that is pretty true. And for example, Jack and I have like different music tastes. He enjoys rock music, but I don't. But I always think that is too noisy, and I prefer country music, the more gentle, the more gentle versions of music. Yeah. And then let's go back to your own artistic creation. So you have a famous painting called The Portrait of the Milky Way. So
Yes.
that painting, according to the information I've searched online, people say that it is so far the most accurate human painting depiction of the Milky Way. Then when you are actually making this painting for the purpose of science communication, are there other like artistic consideration that you will actually add in this process?
Making the painting, that particular painting, was a 2-year project, and the whole first year was trying to map the different objects in the Milky Way, creating a model of the Milky Way, creating a position to stand. Where are you looking from? Are you right in the plane of the galaxy? How many degrees above the plane of the galaxy? How far from the center of the galaxy? And once we picked the place where we were standing, we could calculate the position of several hundred objects, many of which are very familiar: the Orion Nebula, the Crab Nebula, the North American Nebula, and so forth, where they are in relation to the sun in the galaxy. And we also worked with an astronomer who had made a map of the spiral arms to give the general structure of the galaxy. So that was the skeleton of the painting, which was created as a computer plot. And I transferred that computer plot to a big canvas. And then I actually started by painting all of the little portraits of all the different nebulae and star clusters that are in the painting. Of course, the farther we go from the sun, the fewer objects we know. So at some point, I had to be making objects up. I called them undiscovered nebulae. The part we can see is typical. So the makeup of the parts we can't see will be similar to ours. And then that process took maybe 8 months to paint it. And at that point, other considerations came in terms of the colors I made things, the brightness I made things. I wanted to make the center very bright because the centers of the galaxies are the brightest parts of the galaxy. Central part of the galaxy, such as the galaxy's bar. Perhaps you're able to edit in a picture of the artwork in the interview, so as we talk about it, people can actually look at it. And one way I designed it, which was a choice I made, was where to put the sun, because the sun is not in the center of the galaxy. It's in one of the spiral arms, but I made the sun the center of the painting, so it would be easy to find. If you cross the diagonals of the painting, that's where the sun is. So that was another kind of artistic choice that I made to make it easy for viewers, because the first question anybody is always going to have is, where is the sun? So I wanted to make sure the sun was very easy to find.
Yeah,
You may not.
definitely.
Yes.
Yeah, that is definitely amazing. And I also remember that in one of your talks, you mentioned visualizing an object helps make it more real. And would you consider this process of bringing people's imagination to an actual painting one of your major inspiration to create art?
Yes, I've always been in love with space, and creating art about it has been my way of trying to share my own vision of space with everyone. I hope that the art, from just the appearance of the art, appeals to everybody's eyes and then later to their brains.
Have you
Mhm.
actually ever considered becoming an astronomer instead of an artist, or is art also always being a major part of your life, and you think becoming an artist might be better than becoming an astronomer? Like, what is your consideration behind that?
For me, I became an artist because I knew that I didn't have the right kind of brain to be a scientist. My ability at mathematics, not, I didn't think was good enough. And I didn't know if I would be a very good scientist. Whereas I found that I could do something in my art that was still related to the science. And at a very early stage, I started working with astronomers, especially Carl Sagan, but also other astronomers who needed images of what they were discovering or what they were imagining. And I found that there was a role. Astronomers have always relied on, before the camera, the drawings that people would make of what they saw in the night sky. And if you look in the history of astronomy, you'll find many examples of beautiful observers' drawings of the moon and of the planets and of comets. In fact, we have observers' drawings from comets in a Chinese uh, atlas that goes back thousands of years, a great comic scene from it must represent observers putting their drawings together. Uh, so there's always been a role for the artist. And even with photography, photograph can't show you everything. A photograph, all details are equal. And sometimes in a painting, you want to make some details stronger and other details less important because you're trying to show something, for example. Then, of course, with the advent of computer graphics, now many artists involved in astronomy work with software and generate beautiful animations and images of the objects that they study. I recently saw a beautiful animation of what it would look like going down a black hole, a new data-driven
Yeah.
model for that. And it takes artists to make these things. So I think that the role of the artist in science, astronomy, and science is extremely important, especially when it comes to educating people, both educating people in science and educating people who are outside of science. But in the world today, everybody needs to know about science, needs to understand how the atmosphere works, needs to understand how computers work, needs to understand all these things. And without some ability to teach science, most people won't learn them. So I've done in my has a more important contribution to astronomy than if I had been a regular astronomer.
Yeah, that seemed to be a really
Mm,
reasonable
yeah.
choice. And in terms of your collaboration with Carl Sagan, so during the project of the Golden Record, are there instances where your perspective as an artist and other scientists' perspective as scientists will cause disagreement to a certain problem?
No, one of the wonderful things about the Golden Record team, and it's also been true of other projects I've worked on where you have people from different disciplines, interdisciplinary projects where you have artists and scientists and social scientists and educators and people with different backgrounds working together. I think with a project like the Golden Record done, nobody felt they were an expert. Nobody felt that they said, this is how it should be. We were all guessing. Also, we had so little time that we couldn't really ask other people to review our work and make suggestions. It was crazy how little time we had. So we had to trust one another. I trusted all the scientific information I was given, and they trusted my decisions as an artist, particularly because when we knew that we pictures, and the number of pictures kept growing because Frank Drake, who was the technical genius behind this, he invented a way of recording pictures on an LP. This wasn't a computer disc. These aren't JPEG pictures. This is an analog audio disc. made out of metal, but just like the ones that are made out of vinyl. And he invented a way to record video signals on that record. And then he kept thinking of ways so he could get more and more pictures. So I didn't even know how many pictures I had. And then it was 25, and then it was 50, and then finally it was a little bit over 100. But I didn't want it to be 100 random pictures that had nothing to do with one another. I wanted the pictures to tell a story. So I designed it like a little movie. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And there are many little stories in it. The story of how we eat, the story of how we make babies, the story of how we build houses. All these together in a bigger story of this is Earth, so that pictures would help understand other pictures, that there was more information in a sequence than in all of the pictures individually. So for me, that was the biggest artistic challenge. And the people seem to think that it came out pretty well.
Oh, so you mentioned that the picture on the golden record is actually designed to be analog code, right?
Yes. Before any of you were born, TV signals were sent through the air on radio waves. And the record is in a box. It's in a round box. And on the cover of that box, there's a drawing that I made that shows how to play the record. We also put in the box the needle that you need to play the record. We put one of the in, so we show how to put the needle on record, how you turn the record. And we also show a series of drawings that shows what the video signal looks like and how you put it back together into a picture with an example. And the example we show on the cover is a circle. So if they start looking at the signals and trying to figure out what they are, and they try it this way, they try it that way, and then they try it some way that makes a circle, they know they're doing it right. That cover drawing, by the way, lasts for a very, very long time. Very occasionally, a tiny meteorite will hit it. And if you ask how long will it take for those meteorites to destroy the cover, the answer is something like 1,000 million years. So the lifetime of the record before space dust begins to destroy the record is over 1 billion years. So for me as an artist, it was very exciting to be able to make a drawing that 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when suppose that the aliens are actually gonna find the golden record, then technically are the analog code easier to decipher than the digital code?
Absolutely. I believe that analog is much easier to decode than digital. The reason is that because a digital sound file, you understand the file before you can get any sound out of it. Whereas an analog LP, if you put the needle in and turn the record, the sound comes out. That's all you need. In a record player, everything else is just to make it louder. But if you put a record on a record player and turn it without electricity, you will still hear the sound very faintly. You will hear it. So in that sense, this method is what we call transparent. It's very easy. Pictures, I think, are a little bit hard because the video signal is so unmistakable. It has square waves, and no natural sound has square waves. So when they start analyzing the sound on the record, they'll know that some of it is sound, the music and the people talking, but some of it is not sound. So what could it be? And the cover drawing explains to them what it is and how to make it into a picture.
Then during
Computer system, you are, no matter how bizarre. I don't know if they could understand a JPEG file. You have to teach them how to read a JPEG file
Yeah,
or any other format that you use.
yeah. Then during this process of one-side communication with the alien, I remember you mentioned a term called symmetry. Can you explain more about what symmetry actually means?
What was the term again?
Symmetry.
Symmetry?
Yeah.
Symmetry is a property where symmetry. Symmetry is a property of structures where a pattern is mirrored or repeated. One kind of symmetry that's very common is when you look at water that's reflecting the ground, but it's exactly the same. What's reflected in the water is the same as what's above the water. That's a kind of we call it bilateral symmetry, because the top half is the mirror of the bottom half. There's another kind of symmetry called radial symmetry, which is where you have a center, and then coming out from that center, maybe you divide it and then half diameters and then half again, so you have 16 diameters, and that's called a radial pattern. And everything around the center is the same, just at a different angle as you rotate around the center. And we find that in snowflakes. We find that in if you make a cross section of a tree, and that kind of symmetry is also very, very common in human art, in mandala designs and a lot of designs. Look how many designs have things that are grouped around the center, maybe in fourfold symmetry around the center or eightfold symmetry around the center. And these symmetries appear universally in human art and architecture, and they also appear in nature. So it seems to me that aliens will recognize these same symmetries. Water or a liquid, a mirror, will act the same way. If there's a lake of some sort, it will reflect the scenery upside down. And if you have snow crystals, and water is present throughout the universe, so ice and snow are present throughout the universe. So there are snowflakes everywhere. So that same beauty we find in a snowflake, I believe aliens will find in a snowflake. And therefore, our art that's based on that same kind of symmetry should be understandable to aliens.
Okay, so after you finish the project of the golden record, you actually during around 2010, you actually was the director of another project related to the New Horizon, and the name is One Earth Message. And when I was searching online, I did not find like an actual passage saying that the message was eventually sent. So I'm really curious about what happened in the end.
We send spacecraft out of the solar system very often. The two Pioneer and two Voyagers. Number 5 was NASA's New Horizons mission, which flew past Pluto in what year? 2013, 2015?
Yeah, 2015.
2015. And I thought they would put some new version of the golden record on it, because this would be the first spacecraft to leave the solar system since Voyager. And everybody lied, but they didn't. They sent it with no message. So it seemed to me it's too late to put a message on the spacecraft like a object, but we could put a message in the spacecraft's computer. Because if anybody ever finds the spacecraft, one of the things their engineers will want to look at is the computer, maybe even try to start it up again, see if it still works. So if we could put a message in the computer memory and make it last a very long time, would be a kind of golden record. So I proposed this message to the New Horizons mission. We called it the One Earth message because, like the golden record, we wanted a message that was coming from the whole world, not just from one country. And at first, NASA, the mission was very supportive, and NASA was very supportive. But then, for reasons I still don't understand, the project lost support. Part of it may have been that they wanted the computer memory, opposed putting the message on the spacecraft after the Pluto encounter. Because until then, they would need all of the computer to do the Pluto encounter. But afterwards, I thought they wouldn't be using the computer. But they decided that they needed all of the computer because they were still trying to examine other objects in the Kuiper Belt, Pluto-like objects. And they did and that's all in the future. So they didn't want to lose any of the computer memory to us. It may be that when the message, if the mission is ever declared completed, that they'll then decide that they want to put something in, a few hundred megabytes or something like that. That's all that we were asking for. So maybe someday it'll still happen.
Yeah. It's like, oh, it's so sad to hear that because it will be really interesting to see, like, to remotely send a message to the spacecraft and let it carry to somewhere outside the solar system.
Yeah.
That will be really remarkable. And will that be the first attempt to do that?
That would be the first attempt to do that as a digital message. The problem with digital messages is that they don't last as long. We figured with some techniques in the coding that we could the message a million years, and not nearly as long as the lifetime of the golden record, which is over 1,000 million years. So still an object is better than the computer memory because the computer memory doesn't last as long. But for a long time, the message would be there. A million years is a long time. And I still think it would be an exciting thing to do. And the main difference between what we wanted to do on the One Earth message and the original golden message, golden people working very fast. The One Earth message would have been made over a much longer period of time, but with input from everybody in the world. It would be crowdsourced. So instead of me picking the best picture from the Olympics, for example, which I did, found a picture from the Olympics to include, which has a Chinese runner in it, by the way. Let everybody submit their best ideas for pictures and everybody vote on it. So for every topic you want to have, this is the best picture family of a mother and child, of a dog, whatever you wanted to show, you make it much more democratic and have people submit what they want to send and then have everybody else decide on it. To me, that was one of the most exciting things about the project because you would get so many more perspectives from different countries, different generations, different cultures, that I think you'd have a much more interesting
Yeah. And let's move on to the Galaxy Garden project. I think that project for me is your greatest work because in your talk you mentioned how the nebula in your mind resembles flower and they all live and die. I think that idea is absolutely beautiful, and also the fountain in the middle can somehow represent the black hole and the gravitational well, and I think, yeah, it's just so creative. Can you tell us more about that project?
Well, thank you so much. It's the kind of project that people who like it very much. And I agree. I think it's one of my best works. I think it's one of my most original works. And one thing I'm proud of is that in my life as an artist, I've seen everything go to computers. All the skills I learned as an artist, people don't learn anymore because people don't learn how to paint. They learn software. And it seems like so many of the old skills are disappearing. And I wanted to do a piece of astronomical art that had nothing to do with computers. And uh, this was one way of doing it. I was inspired by my portrait of the Milky Way, which is a very large painting because I thought the galaxy is so large that any representation of it must be very large. But even so, the painting still didn't give people a real sense of how big it was and how small we were. So I got the idea of doing a model that you could walk through, and it had to be big, and it suggested that suggested putting it outside. And then the other idea that was the seed from which the garden grew was this idea that to me nebulae looked like flowers. And a flower makes seeds that makes more flowers that makes more seeds. And a nebula makes stars that make more nebula that makes more stars. I'm not saying the galaxy is alive, but it has a process that seems similar to a biological process. So I thought a garden would be a great model. And that's how it started. And we chose plants that would represent the different parts of the galaxy. A plant where the leaves had lots of little dots on it. They represent the stars. And in fact, if you come to where the sun is, in the leaf, there's one tiny little gold ball, like a little gold earring, that's stuck in the leaf. That's where the sun is. And the nearest star, or some of the nearest stars, like Sirius, are little earrings, little rhinestone earrings, just a millimeter away from the sun. And in fact, on that scale, all of the stars that you see in the sky without a telescope are on our leaf or on the leaf right next to us. So you're standing in the garden and it's 100 feet in diameter or 30 meters in diameter. And you're looking down at this little leaf, and that leaf has all the stars you see in the sky. That is the most powerful way I've found to give people an idea of how big the galaxy is and how small our neighborhood is. And the other thing that I found really works about the Galaxy Garden is that, as you've probably found when you talk to your friends and your parents about your love of astronomy, maybe sometimes you get a reaction that it's too scary, that thinking about those big distances and the darkness is a little too frightening for some people. But nobody's afraid of a garden. So I found that the Galaxy Garden appeals to people who maybe don't like other presentations of astronomy. They find it very welcoming. And it also makes it teaches many things. There's a lot of astronomy in it. There's a lot about the globular clusters. There are trees for individual globular clusters. And as you say, there's a fountain at the center, which represents the black hole with jets. In fact, the jets are reflected in the water of the fountain. So the jet is actually bipolar. It's going both ways if you include its reflection.
Yeah.
But the main message of the garden is that experience people have when they look down and see the leaf where the sun is and realize that all the stars in the sky are just one leaf in a much bigger garden. And there are now 3 gardens. There's one in Delaware in the United States. The original one is in Hawaii, near where I live. And there's one in Pamplona, Spain. At one point when I was in China about 10 years ago, I was talking with people in Shanghai who were very excited about building a galaxy garden there, but it never happened. But maybe someday.
Yeah, yeah, it'll be really good if there is a galaxy garden here, because people here don't think to care about astronomy so much. Like my dad usually say that the astronomical concepts are not so down to earth, and maybe in hundreds of years the concept will not be put into practice. And you say like, well, what's the point of doing all of these? And I think maybe there should be some purpose beyond simply the utility of a subject. And I think
Yes.
building a garden here will definitely raise people's awareness of that.
Well, you have a wonderful new astronomy center in Shanghai. I haven't been there, but I've seen pictures of it. Have you been there?
You mean the museum?
Yes.
Yeah, I've been there once. It's quite new.
Yes. Looked wonderful.
Yeah, and there are also some observatories. Like I think they're like right next to the museum. And but I've never went into the observatory myself. Maybe I will someday. Oh, and then do you think this project of the Galaxy Garden is your own contribution to raise people's awareness of the cosmic perspective, which is something that you've mentioned in your other lectures?
Exactly as you say. Uh, my teacher, my master was Carl Sagan, and he and I shared something that he called the cosmic perspective. He had it as a scientist, I had it as an artist, and it was a great bond between us. And I've tried to express it in my painting and in my other work. And if the Galaxy Garden helps teach people that perspective, then it has succeeded. And I feel I've done my job to keep Carl Sagan's message alive in the world.
Yeah, and also you have mentioned that the golden record will travel with the Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 to somewhere so far beyond, and maybe even after human disappeared, they will still be out there. And it's sort of the idea of permanence and being eternal is so appeals to so many people. And also I noticed that in 1998 they actually the International Astronomical Union actually awarded you an asteroid 6446, and the number is actually symmetrical, like 6446. So how do you
Yes,
feel about
which I
that?
like very much. I like that the number is symmetrical. I like it very much. I knew the astronomer who discovered the asteroid. She was a friend of mine from JPL and invited me, in fact, when she was observing here in Hawaii from one of the observatories to try to discover asteroids. She invited me to spend the evening up there with her and watch her observe, which was very interesting. She didn't discover the asteroid that night. This was another one she described. And for my 50th birthday, she gave that to me as a present. She proposed it to the IAU and they approved it. So it's quite thrilling to think that there's a rock somewhere with your name on it.
Yeah, it's so cool. I think as many people dream of like
Yeah.
naming an asteroid with your own name. It's wonderful. It's definitely an a recognition of your great achievement. And okay, so we are now almost to our one last question. So the one last question is that could you raise a question that is like any question that is related to astronomy so that people watching the video might actually ponder upon?
Here's my favorite thing that everybody can do. It's nothing philosophical and deep. It's just a way to teach you that maybe you should pay more attention to the sky. And here it is. Imagine the full moon. Imagine you're looking at the full moon. Now imagine you're holding out your hand and the moon is in your hand. The full moon is in your hand. And next to the full moon is a coin that's the same size as the moon. How big is that coin? Now, I don't know how big coins are in China, but most people will guess that it's a coin maybe about the size of your glasses, something like that. And the answer is that the full moon, the biggest full moon you've ever seen, is the size of the little fingernail on your little finger.
Oh,
In other words, you look at the full moon and you close one eye, you can always cover it up with your little finger at arm's length. And people will say, no, it's much bigger than that. You don't have to believe me. Next time you see the moon, and I know you can see the moon from Shanghai, that's why I said it. It's a great way of reminding people, maybe you don't know really what's in the sky because your idea is not really what's there. And that's, everybody likes it because they can prove it to themselves and they can show it to other people. So that's the question I would ask. How big is the moon in the palm of your hand?
that is really cool. It sort of reminds people of the fact that sometimes we are restricting our own imagination to
Right.
to explore something that is way beyond.
Yes.
Okay. So that is the end of our interview, and it's so nice to have you here. Thank you again, Mr. Lomberg. Thank you.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.